Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this ZFA conversation. I'm Alon Kasudo. I'm the CEO of the Zionist Federation of Australia, and it's a real pleasure to continue our unique tradition of the ZFA conversations. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm joining from, the Bunurong and Woiwurrung people of the Eastern Kulin Nation, who, just like the Jewish people, have had a continual presence and connection to their land for thousands of years. Now, the ZFA exists to build a thriving Jewish community with a deep connection to Israel, to represent, to advocate, and to connect our community to Israel. And one of the special traditions that we have is bringing Israel's best and brightest to Australia through our ZFA conversations. So last time we heard from the wonderful Dr. Fania Oz in her brilliant conversation with Adele Stolinda, and it was a fascinating insight into the world of politics and society in Israel with Dr. Oz. And if you missed that one, you can find it on our YouTube channel, and I highly recommend you spend some time watching that. Tonight, we have the privilege of hosting Dr. Reda Mansour, who's a distinguished scholar, diplomat, and poet. Dr. Mansour brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from Israel's Druze community, which, as we know, the Druze community is a wonderful and ancient people who've got a depth of wisdom and also a connection to Israel and the people around them that is quite special. So Dr. Mansour's insights tonight into both the Druze community and the complexities of the Druze people's relationships with both Israel and across the border into Lebanon and Syria are going to provide us with a unique insight into everything that's happening and how it affects the Druze community. And of course, we know that the Druze soldiers have been so brave and on the front line, fighting with the IDF in some of the most heroic battles. And of course, the tragic events that happened in Majal Shams, where 12 young Druze children and teenagers were murdered by Hezbollah in a rocket attack just a few weeks ago. Guiding our conversation this evening, we've got the wonderful Lillian Klein, who's a leader in impact investing, a passionate advocate, and a real leader within our community who puts a real emphasis on aligning values with action. Lillian's got a wealth of experience in both the private and for-purpose sectors. And in most recent times, she's been incredibly active in leading some of the grassroots activities within our community and also being responsible for some of the architecture behind our community's response to some of the most pressing issues. So thank you for joining us for what promises to be an incredibly enlightening and impactful conversations. There'll be lots of opportunities for questions throughout, so I'd encourage you to use the question and answer tool that is part of Zoom, and let's dive into it. I'll hand over to Lillian.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute delight and a real pleasure to be in conversation with Dr. Mansour. Well, this evening for us, and I believe lunchtime for Dr. Mansour in his town not far from Haifa in the north of Israel. Just as a starting question, Dr. Mansour, a scholar, a diplomat, a poet, what do you do day to day?
Well, up to the beginning of the year, I worked for almost 33 years in the Israeli diplomatic service. I was, back in 1990, the first non-Jewish diplomat in Israel's history. So I had an amazing career, which I just retired from. I served in 6 different countries. I was ambassador in Brazil, in Panama, and Ecuador. I was also consul in Atlanta, Georgia, and San Francisco, and deputy ambassador in Portugal. So we traveled a lot with the whole family around the world. And into that, I always wanted to have an academic side to my professional career. So I finished my PhD on Middle Eastern Studies in Haifa University. And in between my diplomatic missions, I taught Middle East history, focusing on Syria in the US and in Israel. And poetry probably was the first thing I did before all of this. I started to write and publish in a very early age. When I was 21, I published my first book. And it's a book of, these are books of Hebrew poetry. So poetry for me is always the way I write about my experiences and my world traveling all around.
Dr. Mansour, the Druze community is a community that is respected greatly, not just in Israel, but in the rest of the world, and known for its loyalty to wherever the community finds its home. Can you tell us a little bit about the Druze community and the culture, you know, as a group of Australians who don't often come into contact except in fleeting visits to Israel? What can you tell us about the cultural background and how the Druze community fits into the landscape of the Middle East?
Yeah. Well, the Druze are a very intriguing group. Actually, I'm not saying it just because I'm Druze, but I think traveling around the world, I met many groups of minorities in different places, and the Druze have this very unusual and surprising story. Because when you say Druze, you mean a religious group. It's a faith that started 1,000 years ago in Cairo, actually, but moved north, and for a few hundred years lived mainly in the mountains in Lebanon. And from there, the Druze immigrated to Israel and to Syria, so a little bit to Jordan as well. So you're talking about a very tiny group of people, about 1.5 million maximum, that survived in the Middle East harsh realities for 1,000 years, living in mountaintops, basically. All of our villages, from the Carmel, where I'm talking to you now, above Haifa, to the borders of Syria and Turkey in the north. Almost in all mountaintops, you will find Druze villages. We chose it because it was safe for us to hide basically from persecution. The Middle East was not an easy place to survive in for its history of being the kind of intersection where all empires of history passed here and left a mark. So the Druze has this side. Until the modern countries in the 40s, the modern states got their independence, Israel in 48, Syria and Lebanon in 46. The Druze, it was easier for us because we could move all around this area. When the modern states started, we had to become more and more integrated into our countries. And I think the Druze developed this a beautiful culture, which was a response for a very tragic situation, because we could not see after 48 our Druze relatives in Syria and Lebanon. The countries were at war. But we developed this culture where we are very patriotic. If you ask people in Lebanon or Syria or Israel, who are the most patriotic citizens of the country, typically people will tell you the Druze. We have a history of being very brave defenders of our territories. So militaries like to recruit the Druze because of their military tradition. And interestingly enough, you have, again, Druze generals in Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. And we know how to live this duality. We know how to stay patriotic to each country, but also not forget our Druze background, which becomes more and more difficult, as we saw lately in the war with Hezbollah. It's not easy to be on both sides of the border. So, but I can tell you, generally speaking, I think if you ask people in the Middle East about the Druze, they will describe the bravery, they will describe the generosity, and the Druze food, of course. You can't escape it. If you don't know a Druze, you need to get to know one, because you need to get an invitation and see what it means to have Druze food. It's an amazing Mediterranean cuisine, very fresh, very healthy, and with a lot of warm hospitality.
And so, Dr. Mansour, you said that there are Druze communities all over the Middle East and that they remain very loyal and patriotic to wherever they are, whether it's Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, just like the Jews are dispersed around the world, but Israel remains the connective tissue amongst Jewish people, but also the Jewish religion. Can you tell us a little bit about what is the connective tissue that will connect Druze communities, the Golani community to the Lebanese community to the Syrian community when they might find themselves fighting against one another? What connects you?
Yeah. Well, I think we have a sense of belonging to this faith community, which is very unique. The Druze closed their faith because of persecution 1,000 years ago. So basically, you can't become a Druze. Druze is only a person who was born to Druze father and mother. It makes this feeling of a tribe much stronger. And because it's still such a small community, I mean, typically we speak about the Jewish people as a small group of people, but I think when you compare it to the Druze, we are a tiny drop in the bucket, basically.
So you don't make it easy for people to come into the club, just like the Jews don't make it easy to join the club either.
It's funny because our historical experience was always that we were persecuted and people wanted to change our religion. So we never anticipated what's going on today. Today, a lot of people, especially in Israel here, would ask us, why don't you marry others? Why can't people get to be part of your community? And for us, we smile when we hear that because it's very new to us. We don't know how to react to this kind of questions because our historical memory is mostly that we had to hide ourselves, to hide our faith. We were persecuted. No one showed an interest to become a Druze in the past in such an open and friendly way. But you can see much more, intermarriages and openness like this in bigger community. Our community in Israel, by the way, is almost the smallest. That's also behind why we are still much more traditional and closed in terms of our faith. But in Israel, we have 140,000 Druze. In Lebanon, you have about 350,000. And in Syria, the biggest community is about 700,000. And in the bigger communities, you see much more intermarriages with other communities. More Druze will be living in the cities. Here in Israel, we're still mainly living in our own villages in the Galilee or the Carmel. We were trying to understand what's the meaning of keeping your culture and tradition and history and faith in a world which is becoming more and more open and globalized. It's a big dilemma for us.
And now turning, to recent tragic events of, October 7, it feels like we haven't really moved on so much from October 7. Can you tell us a little bit about the impact on the community, on the Druze community of the events of October 7?
Yeah. Well, October 7th for all of us here in Israel was one of the biggest maybe shocks that we had. Many people say probably since 1948, because although we did have big wars in the past, but war did not touch us in this way. Wars for us were mainly things that happen on the border between the military and other enemies. To be in this situation where entire communities are almost annihilated, citizens, it was very different. It was very something that's very hard to comprehend. It was also a very disappointed collapse of our system down south that also made people feeling very vulnerable. And the Druze community, as a community that is, we are the only non-Jewish community in Israel that is drafted to the military. We have to do 3 years of service. We have the highest number of percent, I think 87% of the Druze are drafted to the military. The average in the rest of the country is about 50%. And also most of these soldiers go to combat units. The Druze are known to be always on the front line, on the most dangerous units of the military. And so for us, the first month after October 7th, 10% of the fallen soldiers were Druze. And this is for a community of 1.5% of the population. So it was very devastating for us. And we felt it in every village. We were proud, though, that most of these Druze that died in the first month were high officers, actually. And the reason they died is that they were so brave to run into places that they even were not supposed to be there, just because they thought there's nobody else and they need to do something. Some of them really demonstrated to the country some unbelievable courage and sacrifice. People like Salman Habaqa, the officer who his unit was actually in the West Bank, but he was sitting Saturday morning with his family. He saw what's happening in the news. He took his car and just drove south. He went to the workshop there, found the tank that was in repair, recruited three people's team, and just drove into Kibbutz Be'eri without no plans, not knowing what's going on, not knowing where is the enemy. And because of his early entry to the kibbutz, about 20 people, 25 people actually walked behind the tank and got out of the kibbutz. Later, he went with his unit to Gaza. And again, he heard in the communication system that there is a unit that was in trouble, and they got ambushed. And again, he was not supposed to do that, but he took his tank, drove into this area, got these people out. And unfortunately, this time his luck was not enough, and his tank got hit, and he was killed. He was killed there. He became very famous because he actually recorded a video 2 days before he died. This beautiful nationalistic, video about, the people of Israel. We should be strong. We have to fight. We will win this war. Don't worry, we are here. And this video was played probably thousands of times during the last few months. We have a lot of people also in the reserve service. In my town, in Osafia, also, at some point we became famous because they had a report about first grade in primary school in Osafia, where 18 out of the same grade, the same class, actually, the 18 kids in that class, their kids were in Gaza at the same time. So we had thousands of reserve service people in Gaza, and it affected, everything here. Life did not go to normal, actually, in the last 10, 11 months since then.
Thank you for those of you who've put questions into the questions. Feel free to, and I'll ask questions as we go along. Dr. Mansour, you talk about your town. I also understand that you have an unbelievably high proportion of ambassadors who have come from the town of Isfahan. Can you explain what's in the drinking water? Why such an incredible small population contributing to the diplomatic ventures of Israel?
Yeah. That's true. We are called here in the media in Israel sometimes the village of the ambassadors. I think it's not surprising because Sofia generally is a very welcoming and hospitable town, even in the Druze standard. This is one of the most open, I think, villages in the Middle East. You have here predominantly Druze community, about 80%, but we have also about 12% are Christian Arabs. We have some Bedouins living in Osafia, about 5%. And we have a lot of Jewish young people who rent here in Osafia because we are 5 minutes away from the Haifa University. So a lot of young students come here and rent, stay here for a few years when they study in Haifa. So Sofia is like that. It's a very interesting town. It had a lot of visitors in its history. Everybody wanted to come here and visit. There were two big movies in the 50s already that were shot in Osafia. Exodus, if you know the classic movie Exodus, there are scenes from Osafia of the 50s. Paul Newman have a picture sitting on the roof and on the house near my grandparents' house in the old town. So it's not surprising. We had the first diplomats who joined the foreign ministry came from Sofia. I was the first career diplomat who passed the professional exams, but we had also political appointments. And today, actually, when I was ambassador at the same time, we were 3 ambassadors at the same time from the same family, from the Mansour family. One of us was in Africa, I was in South America, and another one was in Asia, in India. So we were 3 ambassadors for Israel in 3 continents from the same family here. And today I'm happy to say that we even have Druze women diplomats who are joining from Sofia. And some of you might know her. You had one in Australia, actually, for a while. Iman Amasha was the spokesperson, I think, of the embassy in Australia. So we have today probably around 20 Druze Israeli diplomats, many of them from the Carmel area. We love this work. We love to tell the story of our town around the world. I think I told the story of Sofia everywhere, from the Amazon jungle in Brazil to Europe, to the United States. It's a beautiful story of friendship, of minorities like the Jews and the Druze who come together and help each other to live in freedom and democracy. And I hope that we keep sending more and more diplomats.
I have to say there's many questions, but also comments from the community that I want to share. And a lot of people are expressing their deep gratitude and thanks and honor to you and your community for the great and long service to the country and to the defense of the country, and also to share from many people our deepest condolences about recent events at Majd al-Shams, and just what a terrible tragedy that must have been to be so close to this community and to lose so many people in one day. So I just wanted to express my condolences on behalf of the community here in Australia. So to say thank you, but also our condolences. And Dr. Mansour, a lot of questions about the Druze belief system. I know that there is so much mystery about the beliefs and the faith. Can you tell us, or what are you able to tell us about what is the basis of the Druze faith? Do you have prophets, for example, like we have Moses, or the Christians have Jesus? Is there anything that you can share with the community about the basis of the Druze faith?
Yeah. Well, the Druze faith is formally secretive, so I can end this question right here and tell you anything. But actually, I would love to add a few words about it. I actually teach it right now. You asked me what I'm doing. I'm going to start teaching soon a new course about minorities in the Middle East in Reichman University in Herzliya. And some of my lectures are about the Druze religion and history. And I studied that as part of my PhD that I wrote also about Syrian identity, because the Druze played a very important role in Syrian history as well. The Druze history, it's very hard to understand, but to simplify it as much as I can, I would say it started 1,000 years ago in Egypt, and if you pay attention, 1,000 years ago is about the first millennium. It's 1017. So I believe it was the result of some millenary movement that we know happened around the world, of trying to understand what does it mean that the world has come to 1,000 years. If you remember how we panicked in the 2000 years that happened. So I guess there was kind of the same feeling, mainly in the Christian world, but all over the place. And the Druze basically developed this philosophy that the belief in one God is the basis of our existence, and that this belief existed from the creation of the universe. It's not an issue of thousands of years, but actually the Druze religion put the time of the creation at around 200 million years. So we look very far into the history of the universe, and we say that there were always people who believed in one God and in the creation. This is the most basic belief. We also don't call ourselves Druze It's more a name like the Jewish tradition. Jews was a name given to the Jews. They call themselves the people of Israel, and Jewish came from Judea. The same thing with the Druze. We call ourselves Al-Muwahhidin, which in Arabic means the Unitarianists, the people who believe in one God. Druze was the name of one of the first messengers of the faith who actually left it at some point. So it's a very contradiction that we still use the name, but we became to be known because of this name. Other interesting aspects of this mysterious, mystic faith is that we believe in reincarnation. And we believe that when people die, they are immediately born someplace else. And this belief affects our life in many aspects of our community's daily life. Part of this bravery of Druze soldiers was created in history because they say Druze soldiers were not afraid of death. They knew they are going to be born immediately someplace else. And it gave them this this feeling that they are invincible and they are not afraid to die in war. It affects our social system because here when somebody dies, for example, we are asked by our faith not to show too much grief in public because this person was born now someplace else and his family, his new family, is actually celebrating a new baby. So we have to be considerate in our grief, and the other way around. When the baby is born, the Druze are told to receive the new babies with some modesty and remember that this person just died someplace else. So as you can see, this belief dictates a lot of parts of our tradition. We don't have one prophet in the regular sense of the word like Moses or Muhammad or Jesus, but we do, if there's something close to that, that would be Jethro, who, as you might know or remember, is the son-in-law of Moses, which also create a very special relationship between Jews and Druze. Because Jethro is a very important religious figure for us. If you remember, Jethro was not Jewish, and for us, he's a symbol that Unitarianism existed for thousands of years, for millions of years, and it didn't start only in the last few thousand years in the Middle East. And Jethro also important because we believe that near every prophet, famous prophet, there was a teacher. Who typically was the leader of the faith. And Jethro, if you remember from Parashat Yitro, was the one who taught Moses basically how to lead the nation, how to choose leaders who are not corrupt, how to choose judges, how to divide the leadership into tens and hundreds and thousands to be able to manage the affairs of the people. In a way, he was the first public administration consultant. Jethro. So,
and you're now carrying on the tradition with your diplomatic endeavor.
Yeah. So in a way, we are continuing this. I think the Druze still give this kind of example in their patriotism. The same themes of the Jethro story exist in what Druze mean to their countries right now. We always are a force for unity, for statesmanship, for nationalism, which inclusive, for equality. So a lot of these themes that Jethro taught Moses are still strong in our culture.
And so how does the conflict in Lebanon and in particular Hezbollah's actions impact the community, and what can you share, any insights about what's going to happen in the north?
Yeah, well, as you've seen, we paid one of the highest prices in the north in this war. These 12 innocent kids, beautiful kids in Majd al-Shams who went to play soccer and got hit by Hezbollah missile, although they did not admit it and try to blame Israel, but it's a very clear case. The United Nations even have already confirmed that it was a Hezbollah missile trying to aim at the military base in the Golan. So we already are paying prices for that. The Druze in Lebanon has been, in a way, under a kind of Iranian occupation in the last 20 years. The world does not speak about this, but in a way, since Hezbollah became the biggest force in Lebanon, much bigger than the military of Lebanon, than the political system of Lebanon, it's in effect an occupation. They dictate anything they want. The Druze role became much less central like it used to be. And for the Druze in Lebanon, this is a very painful time, because actually Lebanon was created by the Druze as a country. The historic founder of the Lebanese state, Prince Fakhreddin al-Ma'ni, was a Druze prince from Mount Lebanon, and he was the one that came out with the Lebanese national identity. So for the Druze to lose their prominent historic place in Lebanon, and to be in a way oppressed by this Hezbollah Iranian force, it's a very difficult time. And we here try to help them as much as we can. I think they enjoy sometimes our influence, because they know that Israel is strong and the Druze in Israel are strong. So I think Hezbollah, when it wants to do something with the Druze in Lebanon, they need to calculate an Israeli intervention. And Israel keeps saying that the Druze, generally in the Middle East, not just in Israel, in Lebanon and Syria as well, the Druze are an Israeli strategic interest. So we enjoy a little bit this kind of protection, but I can still tell you, even now, because of the war with Hezbollah, and because we have a tradition that Druze never leave their villages and towns, no matter what. So in Israel, for example, the only place that was not evacuated on the border in the north is one Druze village. It's Horfesh. It's 300 meters maybe from the fence. Israel evacuated people from the first 7 kilometers, and Horfesh decided to stay. They don't want to leave. Druze never leave their villages. The same thing is happening on the Lebanese side. A lot of Shiite citizens who are scared that there will be a devastating war between Israel and Lebanon are running away. And paradoxically enough, where do they run away to? To Druze towns and villages in Lebanon, because they know they are safe, they're hospitable, and they will protect any people that come to seek a refuge. So the Druze are in the middle of all of this, paying a very dear price from both sides of the border, and again trying to survive yet another difficult era in our history.
What can you tell us about the interactions between the Druze communities in Israel and the other Israeli communities around where the Druze are living and the Druze towns?
Until the 90s, between 48 and the 90s, we almost did not have any kind of connection, because Syria and Lebanon consider Israel an enemy state, and Druze in those countries were very afraid to be in touch with us, because they would be put in jail, basically, if somebody discovered that they communicate with Israelis. For us, it didn't matter here. Israel never restricted us from speaking to Druze in Syria and Lebanon. So sometimes we did it, under the table, quietly, especially in third countries. When I served as a Druze diplomat, an Israeli diplomat in the US, especially, there are Druze communities. So I could speak with them quietly, away from the media, basically. Something very interesting started to happen in the age of social media. Suddenly in the 90s, in the 2000s, social media now connect everybody. It goes across the border. And you started to see us communicating more and more. In the beginning, they were afraid to communicate with us, but very quickly, I think, because Syria collapsed in a way also as a country, they were they felt more secure to communicate with us. And now you could see, especially now after Majd al-Shams, that was amazing to see how, and the Druze have this tradition because they can't cross the border. So in many Druze villages in Lebanon, Israel, and Syria, they actually had some kind of ceremony that resembles the funeral. because many people could not go to the funeral. So they had a kind of local funeral in many Druze villages in the 3 countries. All of this was online on social media. People reacted to one another, supported each other, but we are still, in a sensitive place because Hezbollah used this actually and started to attack the Druze in Lebanon. The Hezbollah this time, our participation in the war in Israel this time, because of social media, was much more visible. So Hezbollah started to bother the Druze community in Lebanon, saying, "Look at your brothers and sisters in Israel. They're fighting for the Zionist military. They're starting to try to give them this image of being traitors for the Arab cause." And we know in Israel that they are in Lebanon and in Syria in a very sensitive situation right now. So it's really been difficult, but I think it made the community closer. And we tend to send a lot of help to these countries as well. During the civil war in Syria, we sent a lot of financial support from Israel to our communities in Syria. And it's a very sensitive situation. Imagine we are both soldiers in the armies of our countries, but at the same time, we send them money to help them survive over there. So it's really not easy to manage this human tragedy.
Speaking of money, you've called yourself, I think, is it the American poster boy for philanthropy, philanthropy into non-Jewish Israelis. Can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of philanthropy into non-Jewish Israeli causes in Israel?
Yeah, I started to write lately to the Times of Israel, and as soon as I retired, I said that I can dedicate more time to, as I told you, to do something that I did as a diplomat in other countries, but now I can do it from Israel in English so people around the world can read it as well, about this special relationship. I did when I was Consul General in Atlanta in the United States in one of the Jewish events there. I think it was the American Jewish Committee. I told them that I feel that I am a kind of the poster child of the American diaspora Jewish philanthropy, because luckily, we are a kind of double periphery. We are a small minority group that lives in the periphery of Israel. So we are lacking a lot of services and assistance, and the government is not focused on our areas usually. So we do need a lot of help to develop our communities. And I was very happy that very early on, American Jewish communities especially started to discover this and help the Druze. So because of a Reform rabbi in Haifa who was the founder of the Leo Big High School in Haifa, and decided that he want to give a good private education to Druze kids from Osafia and Darat el-Carmel, I went to study in Haifa. And you see the effect of that. Back then, our schools were very weak here. The level was not that high. They did not have resources. So the fact that I could finish a private school in Haifa with my friends who came from the village, each one of us continued to have an amazing career later. We spoke about public administration. Thanks to a Jewish American family, the Waxner Foundation sent me to Harvard to study for my master's degree in the Kennedy School with one of the most generous scholarships that you ever heard about, because the Waxner Foundation sends each year 10 Israeli fellows with their families and kids to Harvard. So it's a family experience. You sit there for a year, you get your master's degree, but the whole family is part of this experience. That was another thing. In my youth movement here was supported by Bnei Brit youth organization, the BBYO in America. So I was the chairman at some point when I was in 12th grade of our local branch. And during that time, we had a lot of Jewish kids coming from all over the world to Osafia. A lot of times they would come for a weekend, stay in our homes, get to know the Druze, come back to their home. And I always say what I like about this relationship, that it goes both ways, because I feel when Jews come to a Druze town in Israel, they become much more proud of their Jewish heritage. They become much more connected to Israel, and they probably leave much more Zionist when they leave Israel. So I think this relationship is amazing, and I hope that we will see more and more of this, of student exchange, youth exchange. Recently, I'm also part of Chicago Federation project, which decided to build actually a new program, beautiful leadership program for young Druze boys and girls that will accompany these young Druze for 10 years of their life, from the age of 15 to 25. And that would go through high school, military service, university studies, and starting to work, and help them integrate more into the Israeli society and get more opportunities and be the future leaders of the community. So there are many beautiful small projects like this, but very effective. And we like them because we feel they are very helpful. And also they are a symbol that some people are watching what we're doing here, and they appreciate how much the Druze invested in this country and how much they are giving to their country.
Perhaps after our conversation, you can send us some projects that maybe the Australian Jewish community can support in terms of Druze communities in Israel. I'm sure that there'd be people here who'd like to support some of these projects. And tell me, has there been a decline in that kind of philanthropy since October 7? I know that there are some sort of coexistence projects that have struggled to keep funding levels where they were before the start of the war. How have you found that?
Yeah, that's true. I have to say that since the beginning of the war, the major attention of the Jewish organizations became the Gaza envelope area, where you need a lot of investment. And we understand that, this need right now. I think even the Druze in Israel have been sending help down there and supporting these communities, and even entertaining some of their communities in our villages in the last year. But I hope that the attention will soon come back, because I think the situation there is, the system, let's say, set up, and they received major, donations from all over the world to rebuild the communities. And I hope that the philanthropy will come back to the normal mode in Israel, because I think it is an interest, I think, of the Jewish communities around the world to take care of the Israeli minority community, because it's the right thing to do. Anyway, we are a democratic country. Every Israeli is an Israeli, doesn't matter who he is. And these communities are usually in more need. Their economic level is much less than the general Israeli average. They lack a lot of services because they live in the periphery. And I can tell you that anytime that we had interventions like this, the results were great. I mean, all of this assistance that I received personally led me to become an Israeli diplomat. Today, you can see minority successful stories in our hospitals that almost are taken over by minorities in Israel, because we still believe in the old Jewish mother's dream of having a doctor at home. So everybody wants to have a doctor. And now I think last year or the year before, 2 years ago, for the first time, 51% of the medicine doctoral students in Israel were from the minorities, 51%, although the minorities in Israel are only 20%. It shows you how much people are excited about becoming doctors. And I think it's great. It promotes coexistence. It promotes integration when people meet each other in these places. It's normalize your relationship. And you can see the people behind these big titles of Arabs and Jews and Druze and villages and cities. You see the people. So I hope that...
I think you wrote about it beautifully when you said that when people from these Western style or Western and liberal democracies support minorities in other countries. It gives expression to the values that they're espousing in their own countries. And so we need to do that in Israel as well as we do that here, is supporting, you know, equality and Western style values in countries like Israel. I want to turn a bit more to your personal journey and your career. You've won so many awards, Dr. Mansour, that we could spend an hour just listing award after award. I wanted to ask you, is there one award that comes to mind that you're particularly proud of that you would like to share with us?
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, for me, diplomacy was actually an amazing fit to my interest and my character. And I think it produced a lot of innovative ideas, also coming maybe as an outsider from, again, that shows you the importance of minorities. You bring with you some different themes and ideas and background. And I think probably the most I am proud of is a project I led in Atlanta in the United States, where when I came as a consul general, I was thinking, and I was in charge of the whole Southeast region of the United States, which sometimes called the South or the Deep South. What should I do? You know, what should I focus on? And I understood very quickly that the African American story is the story of Atlanta and the South. And in the African American story, you have the story of Martin Luther King, who is, you know, one of these most known brands around the world. Everybody knows the story of Martin Luther King. And I was thinking, what could I do to link Israel and the Jewish community to this issue that is important to the African American community in general and to everyone around the world, the idea of people who were such a great leaders in fighting for equality and against racism. And so I initiated the project was called the Rabin King Initiative. Rabin, after our Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, because both of them surprisingly shared some aspects of their life. Although Rabin was a general and Martin Luther King was a priest, but as you know, both of them had won the Nobel Peace Prize. Both of them were assassinated for what they believed in. Both of them were very active in terms of integration of minorities and integration generally in their society. So I went to Martin Luther King's university, the Morehouse College in Atlanta, and I started this project that brought together American Jews, Israelis, and African Americans. And it was beautiful, beautiful initiative that also taught people again about the important role that Jews played in the American civil rights movements. A lot of people forget this part, which was very important, and also re-educated or educated people about Israel, our democracy, our pluralism here, and helped brought the Jews and the African Americans in America together. And this, for this, I got the Martin Luther King Board of Sponsors membership of the Morehouse College, a very prestigious award. And when I came back in Israel, I actually got the President and the Prime Minister's award that year for the same project. So it was a very, very important thing that we did.
So how do you balance kind of the emotional and I guess the deep empathy that obviously you have as an individual and as a writer and a poet with a career in diplomacy where sometimes it requires you to be hard-headed? How do you match those two parts of your brain and heart?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's very hard. I think I was always an unusual diplomat. Diplomats learn very quickly to be cynical and with a thick skin. And these are people don't know that these are protective mechanisms for diplomats, because diplomats, especially if you serve in the developing world, you know, I've seen the most extreme poverty in South America, which sometimes I wouldn't sleep when I see people that poor. We never had this kind of poverty here that I could see. And I am affected. I work, you know, from my emotional side, not from my brain. So When I worked in these countries, I knew if I want to be an effective diplomat, I need to fall in love with this country. And I loved it when I was effective enough for people. And you can see it till now. You go to my Facebook page or to my Twitter page, and you can see Ecuadorians and Brazilians and others who write to me, Ambassador, you're not Israeli. You are one of us. You're Brazilian. You're not Israeli. And that for me was a sign that I got to their emotional, I connected with them emotionally. So, excuse me. So, part of it is writing. I write a lot of poetry. I don't get to publish that much. I published 3 books, and for a long time I didn't publish. I hope I will be able to do it now. I have more time, but I do write a lot. So I deal with these emotions through writing poetry. And I will be publishing soon, in 3 months, a book about the history of diplomacy. So I have two unusual chapters there about the history of diplomacy. One about diplomats who were poets, and some of them actually got the Nobel Prize for poetry. And other is how do you as a diplomat deal with this emotional challenge of seeing so many societies, and many times in their most difficult moments, how do you cope with seeing so much poverty and tragedy, and sometimes wars and violence? So I wrote about 2 because I want people to know.
And can you remember a specific incident in your diplomatic experiences or background where being a poet and being able to express yourself emotionally was helpful?
Well, usually what I tell people, especially for poets, poetry is unlike writing, novels, for example, where writers are very methodic. They wake up in the morning, it's like having a job. They write few pages each day, and this is the way how they operate. Poets usually absorb everything around them like a sponge, and it's very surprising when all of these emotions comes out. So actually big events usually shut you down as a poet. You can't write immediately about it. You have to absorb it and let it sink for a while. I went, for example, to the funeral in Majd al-Shams. I was there on the soccer field. I felt kind of numb. The tragedy there is so difficult to handle that I just couldn't write anything about it. But I know what will happen is that it will come in the most surprising way. I'll see some, I don't know, some homeless sitting in the street somewhere, or I'll see some animal suffering. Here we are surrounded by a national park, and sometimes we see animals around us that are hurt, birds, wild animals, and all of this that I absorbed in Majd al-Shams will come at that moment because of a different reason. So this is what usually happens.
And, we've got a few more minutes. So if people have questions, I, again, encourage you to put them in the chat. What are your hopes then for the Druze community going forward? Like, what would you like to see happen in the next 3, 5, 10 years for the Druze community in Israel?
I hope that, this, for many years, even in Israel, we were not that much known. Again, we are 1% of our population. If you were not from northern Israel, or if you didn't serve with the Druze in the military, you probably did not know almost anything about the Druze. But in a strange way, this war actually brought the Druze story to almost every home in Israel. All these brave stories, and we mentioned before we started that they even had cases where Druze women in the north started to prepare food and send it, donate it to soldiers on the south. Hundreds of meals every day came out from Druze homes. And some of these mothers heard very early on that some of the Israeli soldiers are not eating the food because it's not kosher. So these Druze women went out, got rabbis to make their food kosher, and one of them became very famous. She had a restaurant, She came out to say that in my world, no Israeli soldiers will not get my food because of any kind of problem. So she made it kosher for them. So I hope that the Israeli public, first of all, will start to know the Druze better, to know how much we've been a model of amazing citizenship in this country, that we always wanted to give 200 or 300%, and all we asked for was just equal rights and a little bit more attention. And I hope that others also will take the model of the Druze, including in the Arab community, the Palestinian community, the Arab countries around us, and they will see that if Druze and Jews in this country could be so close to each other, so integrated in each other's societies, then there's no reason why we can't end those conflicts, and we can't become the bridge for peaceful relationship between Israel and its surrounding countries. I really want my community to be that kind of model, and I did it all over the world in my diplomatic career. I went to speak with Arab communities, Muslim communities everywhere, and to tell them about our story here, and to tell them that war is not some predicament that we can't change. We can't change that, and Arabs and Jews could live together, and our community is an example. We are an Arabic community. We are from the heart of the Arabic culture, and we still managed to create this relationship with Jews in Israel. So there is no reason why everybody else can't have that.
That's a beautiful sentiment, and someone's just put in the chat a reminder of that song, Kol Haolam Kulo Gesher Cha, Gesher Cha Me'od. Can you just very quickly tell us some Druze musicians that we might look out for? We've had a question about, are there any famous Druze musicians that we can look up on Spotify?
Yeah. Well, we have on the list of the top 10 most classical Arab musicians of all time, we have two representatives that are actually a brother and sister. It's Farid Al-Atrash and Asmahan. His sister's name is Asmahan. They are from Syria, but they lived most of their life in Egypt. And Farid Al-Atrash and Asmahan became really top 5 Arab singers of all time. They sing classical Arab music. So they are the most famous. We have in the new generation, we have a few. I don't know if something comes to mind right now. But yeah, the Druze, we don't have that many in the music business, I have to say. The Druze much more are known in the Middle East in their involvement in politics and military issues, sometimes in the media also. There's prominent media figures in everywhere, in the big networks in the Middle East that are known to be Druze.
So a few days ago, it was the International Day of the World's Indigenous Peoples. And tomorrow night, well, our time and your time will be, I guess, marking its Erev Tisha B'Av, one of the saddest days, obviously, in the Jewish calendar, where we remember all the terrible things that have happened. And we recite Jeremiah, the famous words that have become, made popular in modern culture by the rivers of Babylon. We laid down and we wept. And I just want to say thank you. And I'm going to hand over to Alon to wrap up. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. Thank you for all that you do and all that you have done. I note that on your Twitter handle, you write about being a man of action, not just words. I think you're an extraordinary example of a man of words and clearly a man of action. And I really ask everybody who's been on this call to look up some of the poetry, which I've had the pleasure of reading this afternoon in preparing. So 2 poems I just want to bring to everybody's attention, and I wish I could read it in the original, but one was The Bride of the Sea. I thought was very, very beautiful. And the other one was In the Language of the Desert. So Dr. Mansour, I just wanted to say thank you. It's been a real honor to be in conversation with you. And I wish you and your community all the best. And thank you for your service. Alon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lillian, and thank you, Dr. Mansour, for your time. It's such a bucket filling and soulful conversation, and such a beautiful reminder that we have so much in common across humanity. And I think your words are powerful ones, that it really is, you know, a reminder that as people, we need to work together to hope and work hard for better times. Dr. Mansour, again, I know that Lillian mentioned this. I know it was mentioned a lot in the chat, but there are so many heartfelt wishes and kindness and love sent your way and to your community's way following the tragedy just a few weeks ago. And we just want to know that you're being hugged by Jewish diaspora communities from all around the world, including ours right here in Australia. Thank you everybody else for joining us. We had over 170 people join tonight, and we're really grateful for everyone for finding an hour out of their Sunday evening for this special conversation. And we will of course continue our ZFA conversations, but thank you to everyone for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.